Good afternoon. I'm Angelica Portillo, the Director of Advocacy and Workforce Initiatives here at the National After School Association. I'm so excited to have you all join the call to learn more about the Wallace Foundation funding tool. The Wallace Foundation's federal funding stream guide identifies providers, districts, summer and after school intermediaries, municipal government leaders, and state government leaders OST organizations can tap to support equitable access to high quality programs. Today, we are joined by Sean Worley, who will give us an overview of the guide. Sean Worley is a policy consultant with Education Council, a mission-driven consulting firm dedicated to improving outcomes for students and advancing equity across all sectors of our education system. Sean has supported his clients in navigating the complex and ever-changing world of federal education policies and regulations so that they can achieve their goals. This often took the shape of guiding clients through how to best leverage new and existing federal resources and how such resources can be blended and braided with other state, local, and private funds. Accordingly, Sean is the lead author of the resource we are focused on today, Building, Sustaining, and Improving Using Federal Funds for Summer Learning and After School. Sean, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm going to hand it over to you and remind everyone that we will have time for questions at the end, so please throw them in the chat as you wish, and I'll be sure to address them at the end.
Great. Angelica, thank you so much. And thank you to you and the rest of the National After School Association team for giving me this opportunity to share our resource, which has actually been out in the fields for, I want to say over a year now. So it's been in the field. It's gotten some great use, and I'm excited to share it again with this group. We've done this presentation for a number of different constituencies. And so you may have seen this before, and I apologize if it's repetitive, but hopefully it's also a good reminder. And if it's new, I'm excited to show it for you, show it with you all. As Angelica mentioned, we would love to answer any questions that you have. We're a relatively small group, so please fill up that chat with questions as they come up, and we'll get to them at the end. And actually, hopefully that's the bulk of our conversation. The overview of the guide itself shouldn't take terribly long, and so we'll have more time for a robust discussion with you all and how this can be most helpful to you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to walk us through a quick presentation of the guide itself. Angelica, I just want to confirm, does that show up on your ends?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So just as a centering point, and I'm really speaking to the choir here, that we know that out of school time programs really are a key lever for creating change and advancing equity on behalf of our students, their families, and our communities. We know that research supports and shows that after school and summer programs confer a variety of benefits, but we also know that those benefits are highly dependent on quality. And we also know that accessibility continues to be a barrier for children in a variety of different zip codes, depending on if they have access to programs, depending on the seats of programs, and also depending on the type of program. We know that youth voice is really important, and voice and choice is something that we really try to emphasize in OST programs. And so one way when we were thinking about when the Wallace Foundation partnered with us on this resource guide was really thinking about how we can leverage federal funds to expand both quality and access. And when we think about the opportunities of federal funds, we approach this with also keeping in mind that federal funds are one avenue to support the programs that you have going on. We know there are a number of state and local funds, city funds, and also private funds that can be used. And our intention with this guide was just to emphasize that federal funds are one additional avenue and one additional source of funding that can be used to support the existing programs and the existing success that you all are already seeing for your children and their families. The guide itself, when we're really thinking about kind of three realms of OST programs, we know that there's efforts focused on preparing for program delivery. We know that there are strong ecosystems of support for successful and impactful OST programs. And we know that OST programs are highly dedicated to creating and sustaining equitable conditions for learning. And so knowing these core themes and really facets of OST programs, we use those to organize our funding guide, and I'll show you how that works in just a little bit. And so as we noted that the guide itself is called Building, Sustaining, and Improving, and it's really an intention and its focus is to find federal funds to support summer learning and after school. I also just want to note a couple of things, and I apologize for not noticing this at the beginning. But when we're thinking about this guide and its users, we're thinking about both OST providers, we're thinking about local school districts, including charter districts. We're also thinking about city and state leaders too. You'll see later in the guide that there are a number of different parties that can access different funding streams. And thinking about the idea and the goal of creating a holistic ecosystem of partners, we wanted for each partner to be able to see how they could access different funds at the federal level. And so hopefully you'll be able to see both opportunities for you if you're a provider, but also opportunities for your partners in thinking about what funds they could access to bring into the ecosystem of support for our students. The last thing I'll just note before we get into the details, that this is just a guide. This is not any type of legal advice for you and your program or your partners. We know that your program is highly specialized and highly tailored to your unique children, your students, and their communities. And so you are going to have a variety of different considerations that you will need to weigh as you think about these different programs and the opportunities that they may provide. But this is a general overview of what federal funds may be available for you and your program. The last thing I'll note before we get into the meat of the guide is that really, as we know with OST programs, this cannot be a success without true community and the support of several partners from across the country. I want to highlight that there were a number of national leaders that supported the development of this guide, including providing feedback, including the National After School Association, and they provided us the opportunity to go in front of providers as well at their annual convening a couple of years ago to really hear from your fellow providers and your colleagues in the providing space to make sure that this guide was going to be useful for you all. And so I just wanted to highlight their contributions to this and also just express my continued gratitude for their help in creating this program, in this resource. So when we set out to build this, we were really wanting to meld together what the research has shown about successful OST programs. Again, what do national leaders know to be true about impactful and high quality programs? How can we pull those elements together? And then how can we identify the federal funds that can support each of those elements? And that is ultimately what allowed us to create the guide. We reviewed over, I want to say, 35 federal funding streams. Not all of them are ultimately included in this guide, but as you see here, quite a number are, and they're not just programs out of the U.S. Department of Education or even the Department of Health and Human Services. We know that those two agencies are a huge provider of federal funds for OST programs, but we wanted to emphasize they are not the only providers. And hopefully by you digging into this guide, you will see some programs that are new that you have not thought about before and may provide you a new opportunity for further exploration. Ultimately, what we wanted to do again was to show how each of those guides, each of those federal funds can be used to support not generally OST programs, but individual elements and characteristics of an OST program. We wanted to make this the most actionable and bite-sized resource that is accessible to you, as well as it can help be a part of a larger strategic plan when it comes to the resources that you're trying to pull together. And that brings us then to the guide itself. There are going to be three main sections that I want to focus on in today's presentation. The first section is really going to be the meat of our research and what we've found. This is going to show you how each of the federal funds can be used for to support again, those three key elements of an impactful OST program. Section 2 is also going to be really important. This is going to be a deeper dive into the federal funding streams that we highlight in Section 1. And then Section 3, again, building off of the wealth of knowledge within the OST field, we wanted to show a number of additional resources that can be useful to you that we know have already been useful for OST programs, but that we wanted to highlight specifically for this guide as well as it relates to program funding. So, as an example, I want to highlight, or I want to walk through the guide using one core element of OST programs. So thinking about, and I'm going to kind of role play a little bit here, but thinking about as a provider, if I really want to focus on what is necessary to create and sustain equitable conditions for learning, I know that a key facet of that is going to be thinking about safe and supportive environments for my learners. And so we're going to be thinking about then, what are the federal funds that can be used for providing and supporting a safe and supportive environment for my participants? So that's going to bring me then to Section 1. And again, Section 1 is going to be the meat of our research, and this is where we summarize the findings of the review that we did. When you enter in Section 1, and again, thinking about that first element, you're going to be greeted by a table that looks like this. And what this table, and it may seem overwhelming, but it's actually really encouraging, because everywhere that you see a green check mark, that is where we think, based on our analysis of the federal funds, that it can be used for each of the corresponding elements on the left-hand side. So we know, thinking about safe and supportive environments, we need to think about relevant age-appropriate enrichment opportunities. We need to be thinking about how to infuse the principles of social, emotional, and academic learning throughout programming, and et cetera. And so we wanted to then identify the federal funds for each of those concrete actions. So again, thinking about then in our role-playing, my role-playing hat on, let's zoom in then to how we can create relevant age-appropriate enrichment opportunities. You'll see here that a number of federal funds can be used for this. You'll see some here that are very familiar, thinking about even Title IV and the 21st Century Learning Community Program. There are some programs within the previous pandemic relief funding, and again, programs within the Department of Health and Human Services. What I want to do then is think about how we can zero in again on this element and highlight specifically one of these programs, which is the full service community school program. So once you've identified that you want to think about this federal programming, the full service community schools program, and how it can be helpful and used to create relevant age appropriate enrichment opportunities, that is now your prompt to turn to Section 2 to learn more about that specific federal program. So you're going to go and keep going into the guide, and you're going to be graded with Section 2. In Section 2, for each federal program that we included in Section 1, we have created a separate section for that program. You'll be greeted when you turn to Section 2 with one, who is the agency that this program is administered by? So for instance, here we're talking about the Department of Education. What is the authorizing statute? We know that Title IV comes from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We've also then identified some other information. What are some overview of the program itself? What is the intention of the program? Are there particular communities or children and students that it's focused on? And then I want to highlight a couple of other things specifically that will be helpful for you all. First, the other thing that you should look at is, what is the type of funding here? Is this going to be competitive funding? Are you going to have to apply and compete for grants? Or is this going to be formulaic funding? Is it going to just be related on the population that you're serving that comes automatically from the agency itself? Then you're going to think about who are going to be the primary funding recipients. Is this going to only go to school districts? Is this only going to go to states? Or can this go to others? So for instance, the full service community school could go to nonprofit organizations or community-based organizations, and even some institutions of higher education. Lastly, for each federal funding stream, we wanted to point you all to the official landing page for each of those funds. And so that's what you'll see hyperlinked in the URL section. The other thing I wanted to note for each of the federal funding streams is that we've also summarized not only just an overview of the fund, but we've pulled out from the statutory language, from the regulations that are existing, relevant allowable uses. So how can the full service community school program be used to support OST programs? And we've highlighted and used that here. We've heard from some users of this guide that this is helpful when they think about one, grant applications, two, seeing the specific aspects of their program that are highlighted here, or even three, bringing this to other partners to show that yes, we can be using these federal funds to support this programming. We should explore more and we should look into this further. And so we wanted to provide you a great a jump start to some of those conversations when you're thinking about how really to make this an actionable resource. Then lastly, for section 3, again, this is that appendix of additional resources. I'll note here, this is not exhaustive. The OST field has a wealth of resources out there, and there are so many to choose from. We've highlighted here just a number of resources, one that we think are geared specifically toward how to creatively use funding. Two, what are some of the research pieces that we know have been so widely dispersed within the field that it makes sense to include here? And three, are there resources that our partners have provided to us when we were building this guide? And we wanted to highlight and provide that opportunity here. And you'll see those. There are a couple of pages within the appendix, and once again, hyperlinked on the electronic version so that you can directly head to that resource if you want to learn more. And that is the guide. You can download it here through this QR code. We'll drop the link in just a few moments as well for you to download it. If you have any additional questions that you don't want to raise up now, but I'll highlight, you can raise them up now. We're excited to hear those questions. But if anything else comes up, please note that you can reach out to me or my colleague Scott Palmer at Education Council, as we were the architects and authors of this guide. So I will pause there. Angelica, I'm actually going to pull down my PowerPoint. We can bring it back up if we need to, but it may just be easier for Q&A if I take it down. Is that okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, I'll go ahead and put the link back in the chat, I think.
And I have it right now as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I think maybe there might be someone in the chat that someone
Yeah.
should monitor.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so the first question I have is, what if you found a source that you think that would really help your program? How do you even begin that process? Who do you reach out to? Where do you go from there?
Great question. I think one, if you haven't identified a program, go to the guide itself and really think about that. Two, think about the strategic planning that you've already done related to your program. We're not hoping that you recreate the wheel with this guide. This should be one additional tool within your tool belt for the work that you've already done to continue improving and building upon your success. And so think about then how you can use your existing strategic planning, your existing analyses of the funding that you're already doing to then build upon with this guide. In terms of actual people, one, think about your existing partners. Who are the partners that you already have great relationships with? And use this to start a conversation. We really hope that this sparks new thinking, new innovations for partners. And that really begins with a conversation about what may be possible. Now, we're not naive in thinking about each of those conversations can be really easy. Sometimes they can be difficult. And so what we hope then again is thinking about the information that we provide in the guide is if you go to someone and they seem skeptical about what could be possible under federal programs, and really we often hear is, well, we've never used that program for this type of work, so why use it now? And that's a valid question. We know that all resources are heavily relied on, and so it can be challenging to move from one use to another. What we hope to show is that this is now another option to explore. And so maybe using full service community school programming, which is what I highlighted in the quick presentation, maybe that's one thing that can be used for OST programs, which allows another program to be used for something else. We know that OST programs don't exist in a vacuum. And so hopefully this can just allow for both innovative thinking when it comes to OST programs itself, but then also other programs as well.
Fantastic. And so how is it possible to use this guide to inform local policymakers that, there's just, yeah, if I'm trying to do some advocacy on a local level, how might I utilize this guide?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind is one, advocacy can also just be small incremental changes. So don't think about or don't forget about that advocacy. Advocacy locally can just be, again, having that conversation with the administrator of the funding that you're trying to access. So don't forget about that. Two, the other thing I'll highlight is that there are a number of resources within a number of funds within the guide that we highlight that may require some matched funding from a local entity. So thinking about then saying, look, we can access new federal funding or greater federal funding if we shift and if we invest differently at the local level. And so thinking about identifying matching opportunities is really key. And then lastly, thinking about that there are some federal funds that are intended to build ecosystems. And so sometimes if you know that your advocacy is going to be a little bit more challenging with one partner, go to other partners who will be a little bit more amenable to some of this. See if you can build that coalition first, showing that, look, we have our existing ecosystem. We want to bring you in, and that may require a difference in your investment, but we need to do this together on behalf of our learners, on behalf of our families.
Great. Again, I'll open up the chat to anyone that might have questions, but I will keep going with the questions that I have here. So who else should I be sharing this guide with? Like if I'm an organizational leader, besides those stakeholders that you listed that have the funding available, who else might I share this guide with?
Yeah, I would say the rest of your team too. This is not meant to be shouldered by one person at an organization. I will also say you all do so much already, and we don't want this to be another thing that you can do. So think about then, bring this and highlight this to the rest of your team. Have them dig through this. They may find something that we didn't think about, or maybe you weren't able to see right away. So we highly recommend that this be shared internally in an organization. And again, it may be as well an ability to thinking about advocacy that you may not be going to someone who can control the funds, but this is helpful to show them that, look, there is an existing resource that we can be using funds differently, that maybe this is a tool that they can use to advocate to change within their own organization. I think a lot about state controlled funding. And so maybe you have a really great relationship, not with the person that administers these federal funds, but one of their colleagues. Share this guide with them so that they can share it with that internal colleague.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a question come in saying, do you consider board members people we should share this information with?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. They are a key constituency that this should be researched with them as well, or shared with them as well.
Definitely. I just want to echo on that part. I think that, from my experience, board members are always trying to find ways to be engaged. And I think sharing this guide with them and saying like, these are funds that we can leverage. How can you either help us make connections here, or how do you see yourself being an advocate for us in these funds? So I think it's a good opportunity for board engagement as well.
Yeah, the other group that comes to mind too is, and I'll just first caveat say, you all know your funders the best. You have your relationships, you know them more than I can ever speak to. But from my experience and even thinking about the partnership with the Wallace Foundation on this research, philanthropic funders really also like to see these type of guides because it shows what other opportunities and what other innovations can be used to complement their funds, not as a way to lower the funds that they may be providing, but to complement their investments. And so thinking about, again, how you can share it with your other funding partners too.
Definitely. So I have a couple of more questions that came in. One, someone noticed that there was an opportunity that they're familiar with that was not on here. And this funding is usually for mentoring programs. So is there a reason why some programs might not be listed on this guide?
Yeah, it's a great flag. I do remember looking at some of the mentoring programs that were included. I can't speak now as to why we ultimately did not include them, but I will give you my answer for why there were several other programs not included. What we ultimately thought about when we were doing this, and it was not a hard and fast calculation, but we were thinking about one, we know federal funds are not always easy to access. They come with reporting requirements, they come with applications. And so there is a level of bureaucracy that comes with these programs. And so with that in mind, we wanted to include federal funds that really then had robust levels of opportunity. And so these are going to be some really high level, long-standing federal programs, except for some of the pandemic relief programs. But these are funds that have been existing for quite some time. People are going to be largely familiar with them. And so we thought about like impact of some of these dollar amounts. But again, that is not to say that some of those other programs, such as the mentoring programs, are not impactful or cannot be used. We just wanted to really highlight, given we had a finite amount of space when it came to the guide itself, what we thought could be some existing high impact opportunities.
Fantastic. Another question came in and asked, do you have any suggestions on how to use for-profits or suggestions for how to use for not-for-profits who want to partner with community-based organizations or other nonprofits?
One, I would say yes, they can be a great resource as well. There are a couple, specifically when I think about the guide itself, one area that I would encourage you to dig into is some of the workforce and youth employment programs that we highlight out of the U.S. Department of Labor. Some of those programs can be accessed by either for-profit businesses or even local like workforce agencies or workforce development boards. And so thinking about what opportunities exist there. And again, as with other funders, even if a for-profit partner can't directly access the funds, in my experience and in our experience, they typically like to hear that one, I can provide a number of resources from other sources. You could really complement and support that with an investment that you can make. And so thinking again about how you could use separate funds to complement existing or potentially new investments from partners.
Great. And so this question is, are there funds available for capital funding? I'm assuming capital campaigns, buildings, et cetera. Could you find that in the guide?
There are a couple of sections that I would highlight in the guide, and I will pull them up in just a second. Now, I will say they can be limited. So a lot of the programs that we've highlighted here are really thinking about programming, really thinking about staff development, thinking about programs for the participants, the students and the learners themselves. But I would I do know that there were some funds that were available, especially when you're thinking about creating physically safe environments, physically accessible environments. There's funding there. I want to say there was also some funding even for not necessarily buildings and structures, but technology and kind of the resources that we also need for programming itself. And so there are sections in there. I will see if I can multitask and point specifically to the section itself that is coming to mind.
Okay, great. While you do that, you got a huge compliment saying, Sean, you rock in
Oh,
the,
thank you all. So do you all.
you have some fans. Let me look through these questions. All right, and the next question is suggestions, kind of what we alluded to earlier, but suggestions for a nonprofit agency that runs a summer camp for under-resourced youth, has never applied for federal funds. So where do I begin?
Yeah, one, think about what are going to be the most impactful needs for you when it comes to the federal funding. Because I say that to think about how to really tailor your search within the federal funds and to find funding, maybe just one or two programs that you want to do a deeper dive. So one, thinking about your needs first and foremost. Two, I don't mean this to be a publicity, but take a look at the section 2 of the guide, thinking about the federal funds that are going to most match one, you and your identity in terms of, are you a provider? Are you an intermediary? Because that's going to limit and not limit excluding, but it's just going to allow you to see, okay, yes, I'm a primary recipient, or I could be a primary recipient of those funds. That's a good access point for me. The second place then I would have you turn to is those official landing pages. And one of the questions I would first look at is, what is the application window for those grants, so that you can think about, is this something you can do now, or is this something that you need to start planning ahead to for next year? We know that federal funds, as do most funds, are on a cycle. And so you're going to have to thinking about those opportunities and when you can best enter into them. The other thing, and I'll just say too, you all are a wealth of research. And so if you have a fellow program that you have a relationship with that has access to federal funds, turn to them, ask them for guidance. They will be able to help you on a lot more individualized level as well.
Great. Sean, there's another question, and suggestions for nonprofit agencies building out mental wellness departments.
Yeah, so one, there are a number of programs that we did include that highlighted the use for mental health, mental well-being for students. And so that is definitely an entry point. When we think about departments, I don't want to get into specifics of what that may mean, because that could mean a number of different things. I will say that there are some funds that I think about that school districts can really access when it comes to mental health providers for students and learners. Now, I say that even as if you are not a school district, is one, school districts can get creative with that funding to create partnerships between their providers and local OST programs. And so those providers that are sponsored and funded by a school district could provide the support services to a local OST program. And so thinking about then again, what partnerships, what relationships, what conversations do you need to have with a school district partner so that you can again kind of share and lean on each other for those resources.
Fantastic. Okay, I don't see, oh, we have one more. Someone sharing about the work that they do. Okay, so I work at a Boys and Girls Club of Palm Beach County in West Palm Beach. We run a lot of after school programs during the summer year, as well as summer programs for kids and families in underserved communities. We have STEM programs, SEL programs, and others. Any advice or direction you can provide on how to use the guide to support our programs?
Yeah, I would think I'm glad that you kind of highlighted and enumerated the different approaches you have some of your programs. So thinking about one, your SEL programs, there are going to be federal funds that are entirely dedicated to social and emotional learning. And so thinking about what they may offer. There may be also some related to, again, physical well-being as well. I know a lot of the Title IV fundings in a variety of different programs can be used for physical well-being too. And so thinking about those. And so the way that you have your program structured can actually be a great starting point for how to use the guide, because you can take what is the focus of the program that I'm thinking about right now, and then how can I look? I will also say a control F if you're using at the guide electronically to do a quick search of where does that term even show up, is a great hack that I wish I would have highlighted myself, but somebody shared that that was how they use the guide. So thinking about the terminology that you're already using to design and describe your programs, more likely than not, it's going to be the same terminology that's used one within this guide and at the federal level.
Great advice. So we have another question. When seeking resources for healthy foods for our OST program, what suggestions do you have? Students are requesting healthier meals.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. I will, it's because it's a great thing for me to highlight about the guide itself. So when I walked through the guide, I showed you the charts with the federal funds that can be used for the guides. You'll notice that there are no check marks for any of the U.S. Department of Agricultural programs, which can be used for nutrition programs. That is not to say that those funds cannot be used for OSC programs. They can, and they should be. What we did instead is we just pulled out a separate section for those funds. And I'm going to see if I can highlight the pages real quick. Pages 33 and 34 talk specifically about the USDA program. So the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the National School Lunch Program, the Summer Food Service Program, and even the School Breakfast Program. Those are included in section 2 of the guide. We just did not tailor those to specific elements of OST programs, just because they can kind of run the gamut. But we did want to highlight those funding within the guide itself. So 33 and 34 is where I would recommend you take a look.
Fantastic. Somebody wants to locate the guide. I'll put it back in the chat. It can be found the Wallace Foundation website. We'll also record this and share out information that we have on this guide so everyone can utilize it.
I'm also going to drop in my email again in case folks weren't able to grab that from the screen. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to coordinate with my colleagues at Ed Council to figure out how we can best support and answer your question as well.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Sean, for this fantastic guide and information and the work you put into it. So I know that we truly appreciate it. And we will be sending this recording and follow up the Q&A for those that attended. And we have one more question. I am new to this. Is there any way to figure out which programs a nonprofit could apply for?
Great question. I would highlight for you all within section 2, when we talk about the federal funds that are in the program, look specifically at the recipients. So primary recipients and secondary recipients. See where you show up for that federal fund, and see, one, can you access the program? Can you access the funding directly? Or are you a secondary recipient that you may need to partner with someone first before you can access those funds? So take a look specifically at that section. That's going to give you a really good sense of where you're able to go with these funds.
Yep. A lot of praise for Sean. Yes, thank you, Sean, so much.
Well, thank you all. My endless praise to you all. I know we're about to go into the summer season, which is an especially busy time for you all. Not that during school is not busy for many of you all. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It's always just a joy to be able to speak to groups like you. I hope this is helpful to you. I hope this can make a continued impact on the communities that you serve. So thank you to each and every one of you all.